Elle, you ready?
Yes.
All right. So here we go. All right. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here, and I am very excited to have as my guest, Elle, Michel. Elle, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. It's great to be here.
All right. So Elle is a licensed marriage and family therapist from Santa Monica, California, with a master's degree in clinical psychology and a bachelor's degree in cultural anthropology. Elle maintains a private practice in LA where she specializes in the treatment of trauma and borderline personality disorder through using EMDR, Brainspotting, Trauma Resiliency Model, and DBT. Elle enjoys working from a strengths and skills-based, insight-oriented, and somatic approach. She has in-depth experience treating clients struggling with complex trauma, self-harm, and suicidality, and she values the use of mindfulness-based practices to assist clients in reducing anxiety and increasing self-efficacy. Prior to opening her private practice, Elle worked in community psychology and at several prominent treatment centers in Los Angeles. Awesome. All right, welcome. Thanks for coming on here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So before we get going here, Elle, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you're currently now residing.
Yeah, I actually grew up in Santa Monica and I live now in Culver City, which is just right next door.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get going here. My goal for this podcast is really to honor you. I mean, people like you who are doing the work you're doing. To me, I find it so inspiring. Helping people who've been impacted by trauma. How did you get here? And then I'm not asking you to share details if you don't want to, but give as much of that story as you can.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. As a kid, I was always interested in psychology. My mom had a ton of parenting books, which I don't think.
Did she read them?
Yeah,
I have a ton.
she read them. I don't know if she read them. If she did, I don't think they proved to be too useful for her, but they were very useful for me.
Nice.
So as a kid, I was reading these books on like child psychology, and I thought it was all really interesting. I started reading Psychology Today when I was about 13. And so I was always interested in mental health and why people do the things they do. I had some therapy as a teenager that wasn't great. And then I ended up developing a substance abuse disorder and went into treatment and got connected with an amazing therapist who I stayed with for about 10 years.
Wow.
Into my 20s and early 30s. And that experience of therapy really, really changed my life. And
How so?
I was so broken and so low functioning, meaning like I couldn't hold a job. I mean, I was using drugs every day. I was dealing with some of my own trauma that I had been through, and I was so depressed. And that therapy provided me like a lifeline, and just to have someone who understood me and understood me on such a profound level. And that therapist, I'm still in touch with her today. She almost became, in some ways, like a surrogate parent. And I don't say that to mean like there were any boundaries that were crossed or anything like that. Like we had a completely professional therapist client relationship, but I was a young person and I was in such desperate need of kind of like a mentor figure and a role model figure and a nurturing figure. And so she really took on a lot of those roles and really guided me through my early sobriety. And she was also sober herself, which was very helpful for me to hear like one-on-one experience of how someone had done that. And of course I was connected with outside support groups and things like that. But that experience of therapy was so transformational for me that I started thinking, I got my undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology. And by the time I got sober and graduated college, I realized I didn't really want to be an anthropologist. I didn't want to go to grad school for that. I didn't want to do research and do ethnographic studies and all those things. So I was kind of exploring different careers in my early 20s. And, I worked at like a coffee shop and I was just kind of trying to figure it out. And I ended up working at a, a, a center for supporting developmentally disabled adults. And so we would pick them up in the morning and drive them around and take them to do activities and teach them kind of basic life skills. Like we would go into CVS with like a pretend shopping list and be like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, you have to get toothpaste and, teach them things like that. And I found that work so so fun and so cool, and I really really enjoyed connecting with people one on one. And I also got a lot of really positive feedback in that job, that I was doing a really good job connecting with people and helping the people. And it just fit for me.
Nice.
So at that point I decided, maybe I do want to work with people in some kind of a mental health capacity. um, so I made the decision to go to grad school. And my real I kind of had a chip on my shoulder around like, I'm too unwell to go to grad school. Like how could I ever be on the other side of the couch,
Mm.
because I had dealt with, addiction and depression and anxiety and all these issues. And I really struggled with that. And it was through the support of my therapist and a couple other close friends who were really like, you know what, like you can do this. Like you are capable of doing this. But I had a tremendous amount of self doubt when I went into grad school. And that, that was a hard, that was a hard time for me. And I really I just was trying to take it all in and not get too overwhelmed. Um,
I really appreciate you sharing that.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it almost sounds like the imposter syndrome,
it
you
was. Yeah, it
know?
totally was. It totally was imposter syndrome. And I still struggle with that sometimes today, 10 years
I
in.
do. I think a lot of us do.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so that's, I mean, that you share that is really, again, appreciated, and that you were able to continue on and do it is really inspiring.
thank you. Yeah, yeah, it was great. It was so funny, actually. Um, just a couple years ago, I ran into someone who I guess I had known in grad school, but I didn't really remember her that much. I remembered her a little bit, and she ran into me and she was like, "Oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. Like, how are you doing now?" And I was like, "I'm great. I'm a therapist and it's great." She was like, "Oh my gosh, you're a therapist?" I was like, "Yeah, I went to grad school for therapy." And she was like, "No, but I just remember you like really struggling in grad school and having a tough time. And I always wondered if you would ever like make it." which was, which was very interesting for me to just hear. Like that was another student's perspective of me, that I
Mm-hmm.
was, I was having a tough time. And yeah,
And I'm just going to say that, you know, sometimes I think it takes a while for us to realize that just because you're struggling doesn't, diminish the process and your journey. And oftentimes, for clients, that is very empowering for them
yeah,
to be across the room and sitting across the room from someone who's gone through what they've gone through and who
exactly.
struggled. And let's face it, it's and I talk a lot about this on my podcast, this ability to honor. In fact, I just published a podcast today about this topic. It's so important for us to honor who we are and those kind of idiosyncrasies of that make up who we are. The fact that we struggled and things don't come easy for us, or maybe I'm not good at this, but I'm good at that, and being able to express that and share that authentically is what it's all about.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. And, um, in terms of my work with clients today, um, I do a fair amount of self-disclosure about like, oh, I've struggled with this or that. But of course, it's appropriate to the client and to the situation. In the
Definitely.
community of substance abuse recovery, it's pretty well accepted that if you're sober, it's pretty much the norm to share that with clients and stuff like that. But with other things, I don't share it. But even when I don't share my personal experience or whatever, I think there's kind of a felt sense with my clients that they sit across from me and they feel that I am authentic, that
Hmm.
I'm not bullshitting them. I'm not, oh, just do this and you'll feel better. I'm really like, okay, like, we've been here, we're gonna get through it, kind of
Right.
thing.
Right. Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
So you get into grad school with a heavy dose of imposter syndrome. How did things unfold for you?
Yeah. So I got through grad school, which was great. It was amazing. I just, finished it up. And I pretty soon after grad school, I got a job. I knew I always wanted to be in private practice, but I knew also as soon as I graduated grad school, I really needed a full-time job with benefits. So I was gonna put private practice on hold because typically when you start in a private practice internship, it's several hours a week. It's not full time, and it's a whole different thing. You're working for yourself
Right.
essentially, so you don't have benefits. So I got a job at a community mental health center called Pacific Clinics in Glendale. And that was a full time job with benefits. So that was what I needed. And I was working with teenagers and kids and families. And I speak fluent Spanish. So I was working with a lot of the Latino population and newly immigrated population there in Glendale. Um, and I really just kind of found my groove. Like, I really kind of flourished as a therapist, and I loved connecting with these kids. I worked there for about 3 years, and this was in 2011 to 2014, I guess. And I still like, I remember these kids made a tremendous impact on me. And I know it's not appropriate, but sometimes I wish I could like reach out, like, how
Mhm.
are you doing?
Of course, yeah.
So because I just when you're working with families and you're working in the home and you're working essentially with the grandparents and the babies and the aunts and uncles and all the family is involved. um and some of these kids I worked with for 2.5, 3 years, like from when
Hmm.
they're 12 to 15 or 9 to 12 or whatever. Those are pretty important stages of life, so I really, really enjoyed that. And I basically worked there until I got licensed. And then once I got licensed, I realized I wanted to move. Well, so I kind of realized this early on with working in Pacific Clinics. I found that I was a little bored when my clients were like mostly okay and just had some free floating anxiety or some
Hmm.
mild depressive symptoms or whatever. I really enjoyed working with kind of the more complex and what we would maybe call like the tougher cases
Hmm.
of people who really struggled, and maybe they were struggling with self-harm or suicidality or trauma or just kind of stuff that was a little heavier. So once I got licensed, I started working at Clearview Treatment Programs, which is a treatment center in LA that focuses on borderline personality disorder and dual diagnosis, which means substance abuse and mental health together. Um, and so that was really where I started learning DBT and started learning the skills I would need to really work with kind of a more intense population.
Oh, let me
Uh,
just interrupt you here for a second. So during this time, where were you in the trajectory of your own therapy and healing and sobriety?
yeah, I was still in my own therapy. I was still sober. I was I had reached a much better place, like working and I think working gave me a huge amount of self-esteem and self-confidence, and the imposter syndrome really started to fade away because I was out there in the world and I was seeing like, okay, I'm doing this, and my clients are getting value out of our sessions,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm helping people, and that's kind of what I set out to do. So I I got into a much better place. My first 2 or 3 years of sobriety, that's when I was going through grad school. Those were a tough time for me, just in terms of my own mental health and other things. But a lot of things did start to kind of look up for me after like year 3, year 4.
Mm-hmm.
And if anybody's thinking about getting sober, usually it doesn't take that long to start feeling better. So I don't want to like deter anyone like, oh, your first 3 years are going to be miserable. That's just, that was my story.
Sure.
But yeah, so I really started feeling a lot better. I was still with the same therapist. I was still doing really good work on myself in terms of all of that.
And what was it like for you to begin working with individuals who had experienced trauma? When you first started doing that.
It was really, really interesting. And it was really, the work to me felt really powerful and really almost like sacred and profound. Um, and I just kind of found that I was pretty good with these clients. Like I had kind of an intuitive ability to um, know what somebody needed, or to really connect with someone in a way that kind of was grounding for them. And I found the work for myself very, very stimulating and fascinating. So I was never bored. I was never um just kind of like, oh, whatever. I was
Mm.
always very, very engaged. I also found, I'm not sure exactly where this comes from, but I have kind of an innate ability to not be like triggered or deeply impacted when people are telling me like
Mhm.
atrocious things that they've been through. So um I am sensitive to like things in movies or TV, or just in the world around, when people talk about disturbing experiences that can impact me just like any other human on the planet. But for some reason, when we're in the space of therapist client and I have like that therapist hat on,
Mhm.
I really have this ability to be really present and not myself get dysregulated when other people are telling me, really, really tough experiences that they've been through.
Was that
So
from the get-go, or does that
that was
seem?
from the get-go.
Wow.
And I don't know where that came from. And I've talked to other therapists about it, and they're like, yeah, that's really interesting. Like I've had to really work on that, or, so
Right.
so that I just kind of took that and ran with it.
Yeah, that was not my experience at all. But that's really, really interesting that you've done that. You've been able to do that.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, all right, you're working in this clinic. Was it Clearview?
Yeah.
Was it okay? How long were you there?
I was there for about a year.
Okay.
And then I was at that point trying to get my private practice off the ground. And I came across another treatment center that had some benefits for therapists in terms of our own private practice. Like we could use that office space after hours and weekends for private practice and different things like that. So I made the transition from Clearview to a treatment center called Westside Treatment. And that's where I really started to build my private practice and grow it. And I was there for about 3 years while I was working at the treatment center and then having my private practice clients on evenings and weekends.
Hmm.
And then in 2018, I left and just dove fully into private practice.
And as it stands now, is there a particular, I know we touched upon this in the bio, but is there a particular population that you're drawn to or feel you want to work with?
Yeah, so I really love working with trauma and borderline personality disorder. And for people who work with borderline personality disorder, there's kind of an understanding that in many ways it's kind of like a complex trauma diagnosis. Um, so it's categorized as a personality disorder, but typically people with BPD, which is the acronym for borderline, typically people with BPD have been through a significant amount of trauma, and that has informed the way they've kind of developed their symptoms or their really their coping strategies that are sometimes maladaptive, you know. So I really enjoy that work, and I find that I'm not kind of turned off by it. There's a lot of stigma in the
Hmm.
professional community around that diagnosis, which I think is just such a shame. And you know, we're working to hopefully end that stigma.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well, there's also, it's generally considered very challenging diagnosis to work with,
right.
right? What about it do you feel you enjoy, or what gets you going with that, with working with people who've been diagnosed with that?
Yeah, you know, I just have so much compassion for them. And my experience working with people with borderline has been that they're pretty willing and engaged, that the clients I've had at least are very motivated and very self-aware and are really wanting to change. I think um, some of the difficulty can come when somebody is diagnosed with borderline but they don't have an awareness of that diagnosis, or they don't have a willingness to change, and they can be kind of stubborn or kind of
Hmm.
unwilling. But I just, you know, I I have a lot of respect for the things my clients with BPD have been through. Like most of them have been through um, you know, domestic violence, sexual assault, some type of trauma in their early childhood, like you know, verbal or emotional abuse in the home. And so I see them with a lot of I have a lot of respect just for what they've been through and their struggle to try to have a better life, you know. And I also I think I also really like it's just it's kind of exciting. Like I don't know if it's because I grew up with some drama in my family that I'm kind of like drawn to
Hmm.
like some drama and some, you know, high risk situations, but I feel very comfortable in that realm.
Share, if you would, kind of like an early clinical error or mistake,
Yeah.
and what you learned from that.
You know, a couple of things come to mind. I I was really taught, so I went to Antioch for grad school, and we were really taught there, like, as a therapist, you bring yourself in the room, and you're going to have clients who are going to push your buttons. And your job as a therapist is to really work through your baggage and your stuff so that when a client attempts to push your buttons, they don't activate you, they don't
Hmm.
really get anywhere. So I had kind of a learning curve with that as a newer therapist, where I had clients kind of intentionally try to piss me off, and it worked. And that was for me really learning, like, where are my weaknesses and where are my trigger points. Like, I'm thinking of one client I had at a treatment center who was just lying through her teeth and just lying to other clients and lying to staff, and you know, not doing the things we had asked her to do, and then proclaiming her innocence. And for whatever reason, that really pissed me off. And I actually accused her of lying, and that was not helpful. That was
Hmm.
not, I was like, you're lying about this, or so, something. I said something where it was like, my colleagues were kind of like, okay, like pipe down, like, just calm yourself down over there. Like, we got to keep it, neutral here. So, you know, really figuring out like what triggers me. Like, one thing also that I learned really is tough for me to work with is when someone is in a domestic violence or intimate partner violence situation, and they're choosing to engage in that and not take
Hmm.
steps to protect themselves. Um, and I know that there's stages of change with motivation to leave an abusive situation and things like that. And not everyone is going to be ready right when you think they should be ready to leave. But I had one client early on who was in that situation, and I had a really tough time with that. Like, that was actually something that I had a tough time tolerating, and my supervisor had to constantly remind me, like, you have limitations. You can't make this person leave this relationship. They have the dignity of their own choice, and all you can do is help them cope and explore pros and cons of leaving and what that could be like and what barriers are in the way and all of that different kind of stuff. But I had a tough time sitting with that. So that's kind of something I'm aware of, that I try not to take those referrals because I'm just like, leave. Like, and that's not necessarily therapeutic.
Right, right. And I think so many, of our listeners have experienced certain situations like that. But right, I mean, as you're talking, that's one of the challenging things I think about being a therapist. So many people get into this field because they want to help.
Yeah,
Well, but you have to define what help means, and oftentimes it's kind of not really what the client needs, but what you as the therapist need or want and so forth.
right.
Yeah, that's really challenging. All right. So, wow, really interesting. Just quickly, let me just reintroduce you. So, I'm speaking with Elle Michel. Really interesting. I really appreciate you sharing your story throughout this interview today. You talked about borderline personality. Could you share some resources for people who maybe are listening and want to learn more about it, and maybe about trainings or workshops or anything? Not, and I'm
Yeah.
asking you off the cuff. I didn't prep any of this, but
No, that's okay. I'm thinking of behavioral tech. I'm just Googling it. Behavioral tech is the Linehan Institute.
Marshall Linehan.
Marcia Linehan, who's the
Okay.
creator of DBT, and they have great resources for trainings. They have great information about borderline personality disorder and books and stuff like that. Um, that would kind of be my go-to.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of, as we kind of wind down here, in terms of a go-to book recommendation, whether trauma related or not, or therapy related or not, what would you offer?
I would offer The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, which is a phenomenal book all about trauma and how trauma impacts the nervous system and the body and the brain, and talks a lot about different treatment modalities for trauma, including EMDR. And the only thing I would caution readers is that there are, in the book, some pretty explicit descriptions of traumatic events that people have been
Mhm.
through. So I would put that with a big kind of trigger warning, that if you are a survivor of war or sexual assault, there are some passages I would suggest you might skip in case those are triggering. But and that's really the only thing about the book that I'm like, could you put out like an edited edition for the
Mhm.
actual trauma survivors? Because I hesitate sometimes to recommend it to clients because of those descriptions in there that are pretty vivid.
Mm.
But the information in the book is so good and
Yeah.
so well written and clear and easy to understand. So I still recommend it.
Awesome. Okay. We'll have both of those linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Marsha Linehan's site, behavioral tech, and of course, Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score. So what's coming up for you? What do you have going on in the new year and so forth?
Yeah. So I have my private practice. I also work a little bit at a clinic. So I have both of those going on, and then I run a DBT skills group in my practice. And that's really fun. And that is part of DBT is doing individual therapy and also doing a group where you actually learn the coping skills. So I co-lead that with another clinician. We have a couple openings in that group right now. So we're just
Is it
working.
virtual?
It's virtual.
Oh, cool.
It's
Okay.
virtual. So
All right.
anyone in California.
Okay. And
Uh,
we can link that up too.
yeah, that would be great. And
Okay.
then I am giving up my office because I've been doing everything remotely. So moving out of my office is on the agenda, and then maybe in 6 months or a year, picking a new office.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Elle, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And again, I just really appreciate you sharing your story and your process and your experience with the imposter syndrome. I know a
Thank you
lot
so
of us
much,
can relate to
Guy.
that.
Yeah, this has been really great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.